Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Ride of the Rohirrim Catholic Podcast. This is episode 3, part 2. Today we have an awful lot to cover, and I want to just apologize to everyone for the delay in the second part of this video. I know I uploaded part 1 on Thursday, and I said I would upload part 2 yesterday on Saturday. I wanted it to be perfect for you guys, and I wanted to take a little bit extra time to prepare for it. So let's just get right into it, because we have a lot to cover. Let me press play on the slideshow first so that I don't forget to do that, because that wouldn't be good if I forgot to press play. Okay. So we left off with the arrival of the three kindreds of the Eldar, the Quendi, the Firstborn, the Elves, in Aman, in the Blessed Realm. The last thing we spoke about was the Teleri being brought finally from Tol Eressëa, finally to the shores of Eldamar by Ulmo and Ossa and Ulmo's other servants. And they build their haven, the Haven of the Swans, and the city of Alqualonde, along the shores of Valinor, just north of the Calasyria. And Olwe, the brother of Elwë, is the king of the Teleri in Alqualonde. Alqualonde is both the city of the Teleri, where they have their lamplit quays where they build their ships, and it's the home of Olwe, their king. There were a couple things that I forgot to mention in part 1 of this episode on Thursday. One thing I wanted to point out was that, excuse me, in the city of Tirion, where the Vanyar and the Noldor are living at this point, which was built on the summit of the Green Hill of Tuna. And remember that the Green Hill Tuna is raised within the valley of the Calasyria, with Tirion at its summit. Well, within Tirion, you have the Tower of Ingwe, or the Mindon Eldalieva, as its crowning jewel. And within the Tower of Ingwe, there's a silver lamp, or a silver fire, whose light is cast out into the sea, into the Bay of Elvenholm. And Tolkien tells us this very interesting details, that few are mortal men who have seen the slender beam of the Tower of Ingwe, meaning that silver beam coming from the Mindon Eldalieva. At the foot of the Mindon sits the house of Finwë, the High King of the Noldor, who is going to be one of the main characters for today's episode. One other thing I wanted to mention was this. The Vanyar and the Noldor fall in love with one of the two trees of Yavanna in particular. The one that they fall in love with is Telperion, the silver tree. Now, an alternate name that Tolkien gives for the silver tree is the white tree. And Telperion is, besides being known as the silver tree, it's also known as the white tree. So knowing that the Vanyar and the Noldor love Telperion the most, and also knowing that the two trees lie outside of Tirion, what Yavanna does is she makes a copy, a kind of facsimile of Telperion, for the Vanyar and the Noldor to have in Tirion. And the name of the copy that she makes in the Sindarin tongue is Galathilion. So Galathilion is a direct copy of Telperion, and the only thing that differs Galathilion from Telperion is that it does not give light of its own being, whereas Telperion does give light of its own being. It has its own radiance coming from within itself, whereas Galathilion has to take all light that surrounds it, and then it reflects that light back outwards, almost like the moon. The moon does not give light of its own being, it reflects the light of the sun, whereas the sun does give light of its own being. So that's exactly the same relationship between Telperion and Galathilion. Later on in Middle-earth history, a seedling of Galathilion, one of its children, will be planted on the lonely isle Tol Eressëa, and the name of that seedling will be Celeborn. And then the elves of Eressëa will later on give a seedling of Celeborn in turn to the men of Westernesse, the men of Numenor, at the end of the First Age, and then that seedling is planted within the kingdom of Numenor, and the name of that tree is Nimloth the Fair. And from the lineage of Nimloth come the white trees of Gondor, the white trees of the royal house of Numenor and of the kings of Arnor and Gondor, which will come much more into play within the Second Age and the Third Age, and we're definitely going to talk about that. I just wanted to mention that at this point. So the lineage of the white trees of Gondor goes all the way back to the years of the trees. It goes back to Galathilion within Tirion at the foot of the Mindon Eldalieva. So now what's happening at this point, it's kind of interesting that Tolkien then focuses in, after having a general overview of the three kindreds of the elves and what happens to them during the Great Journey, he then chooses for the next couple of chapters to focus in on one particular house, the house of Finwë, who's the High King of the Noldor. So this episode is really going to be all about Finwë and his three sons, Fëanor, Fingolfin, and Finarfin. So let's talk about Finwë. Finwë is the High King of the Noldor. Remember that the Noldor is the kindred of the Quendi that is most beloved of Aule. They love crafting things. They love making things with their hands. So they come under Aule's tutelage. And one other thing that they particularly love is that they love to create brand new words for things that already exist and things that already have names. So for example, it's always said that English is one of the hardest languages to learn because there's so many different words that pretty much mean the same thing. So you can say bright, but you can also say radiant. You can also say luminous. Well, the Noldor, they kind of love that. They love giving alternate names to things that already have names, which is a kind of strange coincidence we're going to see at the end of this episode, or towards the end of today's episode, that an alternate name is given to Melkor by the greatest of the Noldor, Fëanor, and that alternate name is going to define Melkor. It's going to be the name that he goes by that name for the remainder of the Silmarillion, and in fact for the remainder of Middle-earth history. He's going to go by that alternate name, and I'm going to tell you what that alternate name is in just a little bit. So the Noldor really love crafting things. They love gems. They love cutting out gems from the earth, making tools to cut out those gems, and then shaping those gems to be very bright and beautiful. And what they love to do is to take the light that surrounds them in the Blessed Realm and to kind of imbue them within the crystal of gems, and also to do the opposite, to take the natural light that comes from gems and then reflect it outwards so that it's a source of radiance and a source of light. These are the kind of things that the Noldor are into. Finwë is the king of the Noldor, and during the high days of Valinor, the high days of the Blessed Realm, he marries his beloved Miriel. Miriel also goes by the name Serinde, and she's given that second name because she is the most skilled in handwork and in crafting with your hands among all of the Noldor. She is the best. She has the greatest skill. And she also has great skills in weaving, which makes me wonder, did she ever come under the tutelage of Vaire, the wife of Irmo and Lorien? The wife of Namo Mandos, not of Irmo, but of Namo Mandos. And remember, Vaire adorns the halls of Mandos with her quilts, which kind of tell the story of the history of Middle-earth. So I wonder if at some point Miriel, the wife of Finwë, ever came under the tutelage of Vaire the Weaver. And meanwhile, Miriel, Serinde, and Finwë they have this blissful marriage. They're very happy. They're married in the high days of the Blessed Realm. And they have one son, who they name Curu Finwë. Now, in the course of Curu Finwë's birth, the life of Miriel is drained to such a degree that she winds up passing to the halls of Mandos. And when Curu Finwë is born, Miriel gives him the name Fëanor, meaning spirit of fire, and she says that that life that would have nourished many went out of her and actually went into Fëanor, almost as if Fëanor holds within his own spirit the life of many children that Miriel and Finwë could have had. So he's known as the spirit of fire because he has such a vibrancy and such an intensity of life within him. That phrase, power gone out of him, is used multiple times throughout the next couple of chapters, and it's actually a biblical phrase. If you go to the Gospels, Jesus, it's told to us by the evangelists that Jesus was aware when power went out of him. Those are the exact words. When a woman with a hemorrhage touched the hem of his garment, power went out of him and actually healed her of her hemorrhage, and then he immediately turns around and said, "Who touched me?" Because he was aware that power went out of him. So we know references made to that phrase, power went out of, 2 times within the Silmarillion. One, when Miriel gives birth to Fëanor, and also when we're told that power went out of Melkor during his plotting with Ungoliant, which we're going to get to later on. But just know that it seems to be kind of like a biblical nod, a biblical reference, the phrase power went out of. So Miriel winds up falling asleep. She falls into this deep sleep because of the power that's gone out of her in the birth of Curu Finwë, now known as Fëanor. And Finwë, deeply sad, goes to Manwë, and he turns to Manwë and he says, what should I do? And then Manwë orders Finwë to take Miriel to Lorien, to Irmo's gardens. There she is tended by the handmaidens of Este the Gentle, the wife of Irmo. And eventually, silently, without anybody's knowledge, her spirit passes into the halls of Mandos and she actually passes away, which is quite shocking because this is the first time you ever hear of an elf passing away, not because someone has assailed them or slain them, but simply because so much power and energy was spent by them that their spirit just kind of languished and then passed away to the halls of Mendos. This is kind of a shocking event and foretells a lot about the life of Fëanor. And it is said very poetically and very tragically that Finwë sits by the body of Midiel, his beloved, in Lorien, in the gardens of Irmo, and he alone in all of the Blessed Realm was completely deprived of joy. This very tragic story of Finwë. It's only going to get more tragic. So Finwë, after the death of Midiel, takes some time, but eventually he kind of sets all his desires, all his energies on raising his young mighty son Fëanor. And he's never known by Cwrw Finwë. He's always known by Fëanor. With one exception, his half-brother Fingolfin later on is going to call him by his name Cwrw Finwë. We'll get to that in a minute. But Fëanor grows up and he has this young fiery spirit. It says that he has these very sharp, keen eyes that kind of burn you when he looks at you. He has this jet black hair. And he grows up and he's extremely talented. He's the most talented among all the Noldor in crafting and in speech and rhetoric. He comes actually under the tutelage of a master of language, a member of the Noldor named Rhumiel of Tirion. Rhumiel had actually come up with some rudimentary characters for a written language for the Noldor. Fëanor takes those original characters that Rhumiel just made the beginnings of and he expands them to become what we now know today as Fëanorian characters, or the Fëanorian language, the written language of the Noldor. They were originally Rhumiel's work, and then Fëanor improved upon them in his young life. Fëanor winds up marrying the young Nerdanel. Nerdanel is very like him in terms of having a very firm and strong will, but unlike him in that she wants to kind of understand other people rather than dominate them and have mastery and lordship over them, which is kind of Fëanor's province. Fëanor has this intense desire to rule and to have lordship and to dominate. His wife is a little bit different. It's also told to us very sadly, and we're going to see why, that later on in life, because of certain actions of Fëanor, he and his wife become estranged. But hopefully their relationship will live on in their 7 sons. Fëanor and Nerdanel wind up having 7 sons. Their names are Maithros the Tall, Maglor the Mighty Singer, who will one day write a song of lament for the woes of the Noldor, in which the history of the kinslaying at Alqualonde, which we're going to talk about later in this episode, is expanded upon. So Maglor wrote this very sad and tragic lament for the Noldor. Maglor the Mighty Singer, one of the greatest singers in all of Middle-earth. Celegorm the Fair, who is a hunter in the company of Orome. Curufin the Crafty, who inherited most Fëanor's skill with creating things with his hands. Caranthir the Dark. Amrod and Amras. Amrod and Amras are kind of twin brothers. They're most similar in age, most similar in face, and most similar in mood. So you have Maithros, Maglor, Celegorm, Curufin, Caranthir, Amrod, and Amras, the 7 sons of Fëanor and Nerdanel. And it is said that that Nerdanel's spirit of understanding and compassion is inherited by some of her sons, but not by all. And we're going to see that fleshed out throughout the history of the Silmarillion. There does come a point in which Finwë, Fëanor's father, winds up remarrying, and he remarries a woman named Indis of the Vanyar, of the kindred of the Vanyar. Indis is of close kinship with Ingwe, the High King of all the elves, the High King of the Vanyar. And it is told to us that Indis is so unlike Miriel, Finwë's first wife, that the difference is completely unrecognizable. Indis is completely different than Miriel. But Finwë kind of finds happiness again. It was told to us before that he alone, of all of the beings living in Ea, was deprived of joy. Well, now he kind of finds happiness a little bit again with Indis, his new wife. But it should come as no surprise to us that Fëanor does not take very well to his father's remarrying. He does not have any love for Indis, nor for the 2 sons that she has with Finwë, who become Fëanor's half-brothers. They are Fingolfin and Finarfin. Fingolfin goes on to have 3 children, Fingon, Turgon, and Arethel the White. And Finarfin winds up having 5 children, Finrod, who will later become Felagund, Lord of Caves, Orodreth, Angrod, Aegnor, and Galadriel. So now Fëanor has two half brothers, Fingolfin and Finarfin. They wind up having children of their own. Fëanor does not have much love for his two half brothers, nor for his father's new wife. So he and his seven sons, and presumably his wife Nerdinel, they never really stay in one place for a long time. They kind of travel throughout Aman, throughout the Blessed Realm. Fëanor and his seven sons are constantly going on expeditionary journeys. They kind of explore the Blessed Realm. They come to the edge of the outer sea, the encircling seas, and they're exploring Aman, the Blessed Realm, and they have this intense desire to find things and discover them. Just a few words about the children of Fingolfin and Finarfin. Fingon and Turgon wind up becoming great kings in Beleriand in the First Age, which is something that we'll get to later on. Arethel is one of the youngest children of any of the House of Finwë. She's one of the younger members of the Eldar. And she has this kind of independent spirit. She's a hunter. She rides often with her cousins, Fëanor's children, in the company of Orome. She's always clothed in white and silver. And for that reason, she's known as Fëaniel, the White Lady. But interestingly enough, she does not take as a husband any member of her house. Later on, she will take as a husband Eol, the Dark Elf. We'll get to that much later on in the history of the Silmarillion. But Arethel is kind of this free, independent spirit. Turning to the children of Finarfin, we have Finrad and Orodreth, who likewise will become great kings in Beleriand. We have Angrod and Aegnor, who are great friends with Fingon, the son of Fingolfin, their cousin. And finally, we have Galadriel. So much can be said about Galadriel. She's going to come into the history of the Second and Third Age of Middle-earth, mostly the Third Age, especially in The Lord of the Rings. Suffice it to say for now that it is said that her golden hair is so bright and so radiant that it seems to have the light of Laurelin, the tree of gold, within itself. That the radiance of Laurelin is trapped within the golden locks of Galadriel's hair. Which is something we're going to talk about much later on when the Fellowship of the Ring arrives in Lothlorien, and Gimli requests from Galadriel 3 strands of her hair to set within a crystal as a crystal of radiance. We're definitely going to talk about that. That's a very interesting matter within the history connecting the Silmarillion and the Lord of the Rings. And at this point, Fëanor winds up creating some of the master works that he will be known for long after his death and throughout the history of Middle-earth. He winds up crafting these beautiful, great works of masonry, in fact. The first stones that he creates I'm going to call the Helluin stones. They're not called that in the text, but recall that Helluin is a constellation of stars with a blue fire that Varda sets in the sky, ere the awakening of the elves. And I'm going to call these first crystals that Fëanor makes the Helluin stones because at first, when they're viewed with the naked eye, they're white in color and they're kind of dull. But when they're set beneath light, they kind of glow with this blue fire resembling the fire of Helluin. These are the first crystals that Fëanor makes. The second set of crystals that he makes will one day become known as the Palantiri, the 7 seeing stones. He creates these seeing stones that when you look through them, you can see things that are far away, almost as if you were looking through the eyes of one of the eagles of Manwë. We're going to talk much, much more about the Palantiri when we get to the Second and Third Age of Middle-earth, but know for now that Fëanor was the originator of the Palantiri. That is told to us implicitly in the Silmarillion and explicitly in both the history of Middle-earth and the Unfinished Tales. And we're going to talk more about the Palantiri in the Second and Third Age. One Palantir is going to be held by Pippin during the events of the Return of the King. He's going to look into it, and he's actually going to converse with Sauron, and that's going to kind of precipitate the events within the Return of the King. We're going to get to that at a later time. But we're really going to focus in on this last set of crystals that Fëanor creates, his master work, the 3 Silmarils, from which the name Silmarillion is derived. The 3 Silmarils are 3 crystals of absolute utter radiance. There is no light like unto them. They seem to be almost alive with the light that they contain. They contain the blended light of the 2 trees. So Fëanor spends his life kind of practicing and preparing for this master work, and he is able to take the blended light of the 2 trees, Laurelin and Telperion, and kind of imbue them within his 3 crystals, the 3 Silmarils. And it seems that within the Silmarils, there's the light itself is kind of a living fire. The same way that the spirits of the Eldar and of men as well animate their bodies, so in the same way, light animates the adamant hard crystal of the Silmarils in such a way that they give off light, take light from their surroundings, and then bring them back into themselves and reflect them in colors more glorious than before. So the Silmarils have this light that almost seems to have a life of its own, made from the blended light of the two trees. These are Fëanor's masterwork, the three Silmarils. He often wears them bound upon his brow at great feasts that are held in Valinor. Later on, he will wind up placing the three Silmarils under lock and key in a silver casket, and then he places that casket within an iron chest that he keeps within his later stronghold of Fort Minos. We're going to get to that in a few minutes. And just at this point, as Fëanor is creating the Silmarils, Fingolfin and Finarfin are having their children. It is at this point, during the high days of Valinor, that darkness once again returns to the Blessed Realm. When Melkor's time in the fastness of Mandos has finally expired, and he is finally now about to be released, he is brought before the feet of the Valar in the Ring of Doom, still bound with his chains, and he sues his brother Manwë for pardon. And he promises Manwë that if he is released and if he's allowed to become even the least of the free peoples of the Blessed Realm, he will spend his time making reparation for the damage and the pain and the wounds that he inflicted in Middle-earth, and he's going to spend his time serving and educating the children of Iluvatar, the elves. This is what he promises to his brother Manwë. Now Manwë, being his brother, having compassion in his heart, being all good, hears his brother Melkor's supposed pardon and grants him pardon and releases him. Now it's told to us that Manwë cannot comprehend and does not recognize true evil because he is wholly good. He does not have any evil within himself. So he cannot really comprehend that his brother is tricking him and that in fact all love has departed from the heart of Melkor. This is what Tolkien tells us. Manwë doesn't recognize that because he doesn't have any evil within himself, so he can't really comprehend Melkor's lack of repentance. So he believes Melkor's feigned repentance, grants him pardon, grants him leave to wander on his own throughout the gates only of Valmar. So only within the city of the Valar is Melkor initially given permission to walk and to have freedom. And it is told to us very intimidatingly that Ulmo and Tulkas are very suspicious of Melkor's seeming repentance, and that every time Melkor walks by, Tulkas is constantly clenching his fists, ready to kind of take him down at the first sign that Melkor's repentance was false. So Ulmo and Tulkas are very suspicious of this supposed repentance on the part of Melkor. Now we know that Melkor's repentance is indeed fake. When he's brought before the Valar, he sees the children of Iluvatar, most likely the Vanyar, because the Vanyar eventually depart from Tirion and go to dwell on Taniquetil with Manwë. He sees the Eldar sitting at the feet of the Valar, and he's intensely jealous of them. He hates them, and he wants to destroy them. Now, Melkor kind of makes himself useful. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, he wins his freedom by making himself useful both to the Valar and the Eldar through his counsels. Now remember that Melkor is in fact the greatest, most powerful being that Iluvatar ever created. So he has a lot of skill with his speech and with his hands. In fact, the most skill of any dweller in Ea within the world. So he winds up making himself useful through his counsel, which seemingly is very wise, his counsel to the Valar themselves, and also to the Eldar, the elves. And in the course of his giving this counsel, the Valar wind up granting him complete freedom to go wherever he wants to within the Blessed Realm. This winds up proving to be a fatal choice, and we're going to see why. Melkor, now that he has this full freedom, he can go wherever he wants. He doesn't have to stay within Valmar. He makes himself useful, particularly to the Eldar, particularly to the House of Finwë and to the Noldor. Why is that? Well, the Vanyar are living in complete bliss on Taniquetil with Manwë and Varda. They are extremely suspicious of Melkor from the beginning, and they don't really give him any heed. And Melkor doesn't busy himself with really speaking to the Teleri. The Teleri at this point are kind of on the edge of the scene. Remember, they're living on the coast of Valinor. They don't interact that much with the Vanyar and the Noldor, or the Valar for that matter. They're kind of living these separate lives on the shores of Valinor. So Melkor pays them no heed. So the house that he turns to are in fact the Noldor, who are lovers of craftsmanship and lovers of creating. Tolkien gives us a very interesting line. He says that the Noldor would later pay bitterly for the folly of their open ears in that time. The Noldor would pay bitterly for the folly of their open ears during that time. Now, how is that? Well, the Noldor are the most prone, most disposed to listen to this kind of counsel that Melkor is giving to them. What Melkor does is he kind of spreads this unrest and these deceitful rumors among the Noldor. He's spreading these rumors that the Valar have brought the elves to the Blessed Realm to keep them captive, so that when men, the aftercomers, finally awake in Middle-earth, that they may make Middle-earth their kingdom, with the elves held captive in the Blessed Realm. This horrible, evil rumor is spread among the Eldar because of Melkor's deceits. Melkor kind of plants these ideas in the ears of the Noldor so subtly that, in fact, later on they think that they had these ideas themselves, when it was Melkor who planted these ideas in them. It's very demonic and satanic the way that Melkor kind of carries this process of spreading lies and spreading rumors throughout the Noldor. He tries to convince, and he succeeds in convincing the Noldor, that men are in fact most beloved of the Valar, and that the Valar have taken the elves hostage in the Blessed Realm, so that when men finally awake, they may make Middle-earth their kingdom, and the elves have to be held captive within the Blessed Realm, under the so-called thraldom of the Valar. Thraldom is a word that the Noldor, and especially Fëanor, are going to use when referring to the lordship of the Valar in the Blessed Realm. All of these are lies, of course. And in fact, the reason that Melkor initiates this lie about the Valar loving men more than elves is because the Eldar were never told by Manwë, Varda, or any of the Valar about the existence and the eventual coming and awakening of men. Manwë hasn't told them yet. Obviously, Manwë knows, and all of the Valar know, that the men are coming because it was told to them by Ilúvatar, but they're not ready to yet tell the Eldar about the aftercomers, about men, about the Atani. So Melkor then takes advantage of the fact that Manwë never told the Eldar, especially the Noldor, about the existence of men, so that he says, yeah, the reason they never told you is because they're trying to have men supplant your place in Middle-earth. They want men to have dominion over Middle-earth, and you're going to be stuck here held captive. That's kind of the motivation behind Melkor spreading that particular lie. Melkor is setting his sights with all of these rumors and these deceits that he's spreading. The main purpose that he has in all of it is to destroy the relationship between the elves and the Valar, and specifically to destroy the house of Finwë and to destroy Fëanor. Now, why would he want to destroy Fëanor? Well, number one, Fëanor never, ever, ever, ever gives him any heed or pays attention to his counsel. Every evil act that Fëanor will later commit was done on his own. Even if it was done because of the influence of Melkor, he didn't do that consciously. In other words, Fëanor always hated Melkor. He never consciously listened to any of his advice. Even if some of his evil actions stemmed from Melkor's evil advice, he wasn't aware of it, and he didn't do that consciously. Fëanor does everything he does because of the spirit of fire that he has within himself, and the impulsivity and the recklessness and the wrath that he has within himself. Melkor has set his sights on destroying Fëanor for that reason, and also because of the Silmarils. Because the instant that Melkor first sees the Silmarils, he has a lust for them. He wants them just as much as Fëanor holds the Silmarils close to his chest. Melkor wants them and envies them that badly. So those are the two reasons that Melkor sets his sights on destroying Fëanor. He never has a chance to come close to the Silmarils, because whenever Fëanor does not have them displayed on his brow, he has them locked within this silver casket within an iron chest that he keeps with him all the time. So eventually Melkor winds up going to Fëanor, and he spreads this very evil, very evil deceit to Fëanor. And he goes to Fëanor, he says, just beware that your two half-brothers, Fingolfin and Finarfin, they're trying to usurp your place and your father's place. They're trying to usurp the kingship of the Noldor. And then Melkor goes, and then he goes and speaks to Fingolfin and Finarfin, and he says, you know that your half-brother Fëanor, he doesn't have any love for you. Just beware, because he has his father in his hand, and he himself is going to lord over you. And there's going to come a day when he's going to expel you from Tirion. Fëanor is going to become king because he has his father in his hand, and he's going to expel the both of you and your houses, your families, from Tirion. These are the lies that he spreads in turn to Fëanor on one side and Fingolfin and Finarfin on the other. Fëanor on one side, Fingolfin and Finarfin on the other, they start getting very angry. Tensions are rising. Unrest is spreading among the Noldor. It is said that the peace of Valinor is poisoned because of the lies and deceits spread by Melkor. Melkor kind of suggests to all of the members of the Noldor to create weapons. He kind of tempts them to create weapons. And they do so, almost as if they're preparing for war. And all of their weapons, all of their shields are emblazoned with the tokens of their respective houses. So there's an emblem of the house of Fëanor, an emblem of the house of Fingolfin, an emblem of the house of Finarfin, almost as if they're preparing for war. Fëanor winds up creating in secret this workshop where he makes his weapons that's unknown even to Melkor. That's how quick to wrath and quick to anger Fëanor is. He winds up creating this smithy where he makes these fell weapons, these evil weapons, and armor for himself and his sons without the knowledge even of Melkor. So it's as all of this is happening, Finwë, the High King of the Noldor, he sees all of this unrest spreading among his sons, and he winds up calling a council of his lords within his house. And again, his house sits at the foot of the Mindon, at the foot of the Tower of Ingwe, within Tirion upon Tuna. He calls his lords together, and just as he does so, Fingolfin enters the hall and takes counsel with his father. And Fingolfin tells him, "O Lord and Father, why won't you restrain our brother Finwë? Because he's been causing all this trouble," essentially. And just as Fingolfin is saying these words, Fëanor strides into the hall, arrayed in full battle armor. He has his helmet upon his head with a red plume on top of the helmet. He has this mighty sword at his side. And he turns to Fingolfin and he points his sword at Fingolfin before his very father, before Finwë. And he says, "Get thee gone and take thy due place." Fingolfin bows before his father, does not look at and does not say one word to Fëanor, and he leaves the hall. Fëanor follows Fingolfin outside the hall, and before their father's doors, Fëanor draws his sword once more and points it and places the tip of it on Fingolfin's chest. And he basically says, to kind of summarize what he says, "If you and your brother do not stop trying to usurp both the kingship and my father's love from me, perhaps you will meet my wrath," essentially. Fëanor threatens to kill Fingolfin if he doesn't stop supposedly colluding with Finarfin to take his place as the successor to his father, and also to take their father's love and to kind of steal away the love that Finwë has for Fëanor and take it for themselves. This has all come from the lies of Melkor. None of this was done without the lies of Melkor. Fëanor does this. He is motivated by this because of the lies and the deceits that Melkor has planted within his heart, unbeknownst to Fëanor himself. When this happens, the Valar, grieved, Manwë is especially grieved that this is happening. The Valar summon both Fëanor and witnesses to what just transpired to the gates of Valmar, presumably to the Ring of Doom, to kind of answer for all of the stuff that has gone on. And so Fëanor, along with some other witnesses who saw him threaten Fingolfin, comes before the Valar, and he is bidden by Mandos to tell the complete truth of what happened. Fëanor does indeed tell the complete truth. He winds up going all the way back to Melkor spreading these lies and deceits, and that kind of being the catalyst for Fëanor preparing for war, making all these weapons, and threatening Fingolfin. He kind of lays bare the fact that Melkor was at the source of all of these troubles. I don't think he really comprehends it at this point, but he does mention that Melkor was kind of at the root, at the start of all of these preparations that Fëanor was making for war. One other thing that I forgot to mention, another thing that Fëanor was doing as a result of the lies and deceits of Melkor is that he was speaking publicly in Tirion among his own people. He was speaking against the Valar, saying that the Valar were holding them in thraldom, were kind of ruling over them as masters and not as guides, not as fathers, not as friends, not as caretakers, but as masters over slaves. And he was kind of bidding the Noldor to flee and to leave the Blessed Realm and to go back to Middle-earth where they awakened and to kind of rule over Middle-earth with their own independence. Fëanor has been speaking openly against the Valar, and that's yet another reason that he's summoned before them to kind of answer for these crimes that he's committed. Mandos, after Fëanor speaks, rebukes Fëanor for having listened to these deceits of Melkor, and he pronounces a sentence upon Fëanor to dwell 12 years somewhere else, not in Tirion. So Fëanor is exiled from the city of his people. He has to go live somewhere else for 12 years. After 12 years, Fëanor will be released from this doom, and all the crimes that he committed will be held as redressed, as forgiven, as pardoned, essentially. This is what Mandos tells to Fëanor. Fëanor's completely humiliated before the Valar, and especially before Mandos when this happens. And Mandos specifically says, after 12 years, you will be released from this doom unless someone else should release you before then. And Fingolfin, standing there with Fëanor, says, I will release my brother. A moment of mercy by Fingolfin. Fëanor says no word, he's humiliated. He goes back to Tirion, he takes his jewels, he takes the Silmarils, he takes all his treasures. He and his 7 sons and Finwë remove from Tirion, they remove from the area surrounding the 2 trees and Valmar, and they go and they establish a stronghold to the north called Formenos, a strong fortress where Fëanor then imprisons the Silmarils within a silver casket. He places that silver casket within an iron chest, and that iron chest is held under lock and key within Formenos. Now, why does Finwë go with Fëanor and his grandchildren, the 7 sons of Fëanor, and most likely Nerdanel, Fëanor's wife? Well, we're told that it's because of the love that Finwë held for Fëanor. Remember, Fëanor was his first child, and it's the only memory that he has of Mediel, his first wife. So he winds up going to Formenos with Fëanor, and Fingolfin inherits the throne and becomes king of the Noldor in Tirion at this time. So at this point, it seems to Fëanor like everything that Melkor told him would come to pass indeed has come to pass. Fingolfin has usurped his place. He's been exiled. It seems like exactly what Melkor said has come true. So Fëanor is kind of brooding in the darkness and in the silence. Now, after the Valar find out that Melkor was at the root of all of these deceits and lies that led Fëanor to threaten Fingolfin and to speak out against them, immediately, Tulkas, who probably never believed that Melkor authentically repented, he springs up and he goes after Melkor. He wants to pursue him, bring him back in chains, and to have him sentenced once more. But Tulkas does this to no avail. Melkor has a lot of power. He's very powerful at this point, and he kind of changes his form so that Tulkas cannot find him. And he winds up going to Formenos, unsurprisingly. He speaks to Fëanor at Formenos before his door, now that he's evaded Tulkas' pursuit. And he says, do you see now that everything I told you would happen has indeed happened? It's come to pass. Will you trust me to help you go and create a kingdom for you and your people in Middle-earth? You who are the mightiest among all of the dwellers in Arda, let me help you, trust me, and I will help you establish a kingdom of your own. Fëanor actually debates with himself. He kind of considers this proposition of Melkor. But then Melkor goes a little bit too far. He says, think not that the Silmarils will lie safe anywhere within the reach of the Valar. And it is at that moment that Fëanor, the light goes off in his head, and he says, wait a minute. Melkor is lusting for the Silmarils. He wants my Silmarils. He wants my jewels. That's the only reason he's been doing this. He wants the Silmarils for himself. That's the only reason he's feigned friendship with me. So Fëanor looks at Melkor, and so powerful, he looks into the eyes of the most powerful being that Iluvatar ever created, and he sees there the lust for the Silmarils. And what does he do? He says, get thee gone, thou jail crow of Mandos. And he slams the doors of Formenos in the face of the most powerful being that Iluvatar ever created. Melkor, in shame and with his heart burning in anger, flees as a thundercloud from Formenos. He passes through the Calasyria, goes north past Alqualonde, the havens of the Teleri. The elves within Tirion and in Alqualonde see this happen. They send messengers to Valmar, along with Finwë. Finwë, in fear, sends messengers to Valmar at the appearance of Melkor. And when the Valar now hear that Melkor showed up at Formenos, both Tulkas and Orome set out to capture him. Once again, this will be to no avail. They set out to capture him. Melkor tricks them, and he pretends to be going north towards the region known as Araman, which is close to the grinding ice, the Helcaraxe, which is the strait that connects Aman and Middle-earth. He pretends to be going north that way, and Orome and Tulkas assume that he'd be going north that way in order to go back to Middle-earth to his old stronghold of Angband. But this is a trick, because as soon as Orome and Tulkas set out in pursuit of him, Melkor secretly turns back south. Again, he changes his form so that they don't recognize him. He goes south, 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 past Valmar, past Tirion, past Taniquetil, past the Two Trees. He travels all the way to the south to the uninhabited, unexplored regions of Aman, of the Blessed Realm. He comes to the region known as Avathar. Avathar is a coastal region lying east of the Pelori and west of the shores. So it's this land basically along, you could say, along the beach of Valinor. It's unexplored, it's uninhabited, and the way that Tolkien describes Avathar, it reminded me very much of, you've ever seen the movie Alien 3, the prison planet, the penal colony in which Alien 3 takes place. I'm very much reminded of that with the way that Tolkien describes Avathar and the uninhabited region of Avathar. Melkor travels south down to Avathar, and in Avathar, hidden within a dark cleft of the mountains, in the far south, lies Ungoliant. Ungoliant is an evil Maiar spirit who takes the form of this monstrous, grotesque, gigantic spider. Ungoliant was one of the evil fallen Maiar spirits who allied themselves to Melkor back during the music of the Ainur, and she descended with Melkor back into Middle-earth during the spring of Arda, which was when Melkor cast down the two lamps, Iluin and Ormal. She descended back into Arda at that point with him, but she rebelled against her master, and she wanted to be a master for herself. And she has this constant, unabated lust for light. She feeds on light. Any source that she can find for light, she sucks it up. And it's grotesque, it's filthy, it's disgusting. She is this evil spirit in the form of this giant monstrous spider. She feeds on light. She literally feeds on light. She has this lust for light, just like Melkor and Fëanor have a lust for the Silmarils. So Melkor approaches her, and he clothes himself once more in the suit of armor that he wore when he was ruling over Utumno. And John Howe has this beautiful illustration of Melkor donning this outfit before Ungoliant, and it's this very scary outfit, resembling the outfit that Peter Jackson and his team made for the Witch King in The Return of the King, but all the more terrible. So picture the Witch King, his scary armor on steroids, and you've maybe come close to the armor that Melkor wears when he approaches Ungoliant. So he approaches Ungoliant and he tells to her, paraphrasing of course, listen, I hate the Valar, you hate the Valar. You have a constant lust for light. I want to destroy the Valar and I want to destroy their relationship with the elves. If you will help me, I will give you whatever you want, and I'll give it to you with both hands, which is kind of an expression saying, I'll give you more than you need, more than you desire, if you will just help me. Ungoliant debates with herself because she has a great fear of the Valar. Remember, she's a Maiar spirit. She's less powerful than the Valar. She doesn't want to travel north to where the Valar have their power and risk being destroyed. Finally, she agrees under the promise that she's going to be fed by Melkor. Now, it's not specified what she's going to be fed, but she tells Melkor, I'll help you, but you have to fulfill your promise to me. You got to give me something to eat. And remember, she feeds on light, so keep that in mind. So Ungoliant creates these webs. She creates out of webs stairs and ladders on which Melkor climbs the many summits and the mountains and the hills and the clefts in the rocks of the south of Avathar. And eventually both of them come to the summit of the mountain Hyarmentir. Hyarmentir is the tallest mountain in the south of the Blessed Realm. Ungoliant climbs to the top of it. She creates a ladder out of her webs, and she kind of throws it down to Melkor. Melkor climbs up the ladder, and then the two of them standing on top of the summit of Hyarmentir, far south of Taniquetil, very far south, they look across the Blessed Realm, and they see the shining plains of Valmar. They see the silver domes of Valmar. They see the pastures of Yavanna blowing in the wind, the wheat of the gods, which is a Eucharistic reference, actually. The wheat of the gods, you can kind of change the words there. You can change wheat to bread, and you can change gods to first Valar, and then you can change Valar to angels. So it becomes the bread of angels, that the pastures of Yavanna are in fact a field of the bread of angels, which is a title for the Eucharist in Catholic tradition. They see Orome's woods. They see the pastures of Yavanna. They see the silver domes of Valmar. And far off, far away, they see in Valmar the golden light created when the light of the two trees blends together at a certain time of the day. Melkor and Ungoliant leap down from Hyarmentir. Melkor laughs, and this evil, bitter laugh. And at this very moment, Valmar is completely uninhabited. Now, why is that? It's because all of the inhabitants of Valmar have traveled to Taniquetil for a great high feast that Manwë has declared in honor and praise and adoration to Iluvatar. This feast has been created as a celebration of the first harvest of the fruits and the produce of the Blessed Realm. Now, remember that the Valar have clothed themselves with similar bodies to the elves and later men, which means also that because they've taken these forms within the confines of the world, they also need to eat in order to nourish themselves. Now, they're immortal, they're all-powerful, they're spiritual beings, but because they've taken human form, they now have to eat to kind of in order to abide by the natural laws with which they've literally clothed themselves in the bodies of elves and men. So because they need to eat, they plant crops, and it is at the first harvest that they have planted, that Yavanna has planted, that Manwë then celebrates this harvest with a grand feast to which he invites all the dwellers in Arda. He actually commands Fëanor to come to the feast. It's his command. Remember, now Fëanor has been exiled from Tedion. He's basically living under house arrest in Formenos. But he is commanded to come by Manwë. And Manwë kind of wants to heal all of the evil that has been done among the Noldor because of Melkor. Now, remember, he and the other Valar don't know what Melkor has been doing. They don't know where he is. They can't find him. But despite even that, they want to hold this feast to kind of bring joy back to Valinor. Joy that was poisoned, joy that was taken away because of the lies and deceits of Melkor and the fruits, the evil fruits that caused. Fëanor is forced to come to the feast, to come to Taniquetil, and before Manwë's throne, Fëanor is bidden to shake the hand of Fingolfin. Fingolfin and Fëanor are kind of commanded to make up, so to speak. You know, I remember when I was in elementary school, I had to make up with one of my classmates because there was an issue between us, and we were forced to shake hands in front of our principal. Well, that kind of reminds me, or I was reminded of that when I read this, that Fingolfin and Fëanor, Fingolfin and Fëanor are forced to shake hands before the throne of Manwë. Fingolfin says, I hold your injuries or your grievances redressed. I pardon you, essentially. I pardon you for threatening my life. And he says, half brother in blood, full brother in heart will I be. You will lead, and I will follow. He extends his hand to Fëanor. Fëanor takes his hand, and he says, I hear thee, so be it. Fëanor is really kind of quiet during this exchange. And it is said that they make up in word. Tolkien goes out of his way to say that they make up in word only. So is this really a repentance on the part of Fëanor in his heart? No, definitely not. And it is also told to us that the only bad thing that kind of corresponded with the proclaiming of this great high feast, The only thing that Tolkien says marred the designs of Manwë in declaring this high feast were two things. One, Finwë does not come to the feast. The reason Finwë does not come to the feast is that he says, because my son has been exiled from the city of my people, I hold myself unkinged. In other words, I'm not going to come before my people as their king as long as my son has been exiled from our city. So Finwë remains behind in Formenos. What also remains behind with him? The Silmarils, because Fëanor, in his anger and in his dejectedness and his humiliation before the Valar, remember, because he's been sentenced to 12 years under house arrest in Formenos, he refuses to bring the Silmarils to the feast. Now, we know from the past that Fëanor always used to bring the Silmarils for all to see, and he would wear them upon his brow. But not only does he refuse to bring them, he leaves them behind in Formenos with his father. He also doesn't come dressed properly for the feast, which is again another biblical reference. In the parables of Jesus, he talks constantly about a wedding feast. And there's this one specific parable where a guest comes to the feast who's not dressed properly and is thrown out of the feast, and he's thrown outside of the house where the feast is being held, where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. That's in one of the parables of Jesus. So I don't think it's an accident that Tolkien says that Fëanor did not come to this feast in praise of Ilúvatar, mind you. He did not come dressed properly. So the Silmarils are in Formenos. Fëanor refused to bring them. Finwë has refused to come to the feast, and Fëanor is not dressed properly for the feast. And at the very moment that Fingolfin and Fëanor are supposedly making up before the throne of Manwë in Taniquetil during this high feast, the streets and the stairs of Valmar and Tedion are completely empty of all inhabitants. It is at this point that Melkor and Ungoliant spring upon Ezilohar. They spring upon the mound of the two trees. Melkor takes this great spear that he has, this giant mace, also illustrated very hauntingly by John Howe, and he stabs both trees to their core so that the sap of the two trees comes gushing out once he takes out his spear. So Melkor stabs both trees. Ungoliant sucks up the sap from the wounds of the trees. Tolkien calls them wounds. She sucks up the sap from the trees, and then she goes to the wells that lie underneath the trees that were capturing their dews, the wells that Varda had set up, and she sucks those wells dry. So she's taking in all of the dew and all the sap of the trees, and she's belching forth these black vapors as she's sucking up the sap. And she grows in the process of sucking up all this sap from the two trees, sucking up literally the light of the two trees. She grows to such a grotesque and monstrous size that Melkor himself becomes afraid of her. Melkor becomes afraid of her because of this grotesque, monstrous, gigantic size that she's growing to in the course of sucking the trees dry. The trees have all of their light completely sucked out. They're withered. The trees are turned black. And all of Aman founders in a sea of darkness. Melkor and Ungoliant flee far to the north, and Ungoliant clothes the two of them with this kind of security blanket that Tolkien calls the Unlight. Now, the Unlight is more than darkness. The Unlight is this, it reminds me of a black hole. It's this darkness that is so deep, so complete, that when one looks into it, not only do you not see the thing that Unlight is covering, but it seems as if there's a void in that space, as if there's a black hole in that space. So Melkor and Ungoliant are clothed with this Unlight. They flee to the north, and all of Aman is just completely cloaked in darkness. There's no more light. Remember, there's no sun, there's no moon. The only light came from the two trees. Now the two trees have been extinguished, and there's complete and total darkness. Taniquetil alone lies outside of this darkness simply because it's the holy mountain of Manwë. And thank God that everyone is gathered on Taniquetil at this point when this happens. Varda looks out from the summit of Taniquetil, and she can tell that there's something moving, but she can't really tell what it is amidst the darkness. It is said that Manwë alone can tell where the source of this darkness is coming from, and he sees something traveling fast, traveling far to the north, and he knows, because he is the most powerful of the Valar, he knows that his brother has escaped. And as soon as this happens, the moment that this happens, Orome and Tulkas set out with their respective hosts. And it is said that the first light that returned to Valinor was the light created by the sparks coming from the hooves of Nahar and the other horses of Orome's company as they travel with all speed, traveling faster than the Nazgul ever will travel during the Third Age. They're traveling with all speed to the north to capture Melkor, because now they know that Melkor is the cause of this. And Tulkas's great pounds upon the earth as he runs, traveling in pursuit of Melkor. It causes the earth to thunder and shake. So the first light that ever returns to the Blessed Realm are the sparks created by the hooves of Nahar, Orome riding upon Nahar with his company of hunters, along with Tulkas thundering on the ground, traveling north in pursuit of Melkor. Once again, their efforts will be confounded. They're not going to be able to capture him, because the darkness that Ungoliant has created is so deep and so thick that it kind of confuses and befuddles the senses, so to speak, of both Tulkas and of Orome and his hunters. And it is said very tragically that the sound of the Valaroma, the sound of Orome's great horn, falters. For the first time ever, it falters. The sound is no longer intimidating. In the darkness that has been caused by the destruction of the two trees and the flight of Melkor and Ungoliant. After a time, the party on Taniquetil moves to outside the gates of Valmar, moves to the mound of the two trees as Elohar. Yavanna goes up onto the mound and she touches the trees with her hand. And as soon as she touches, every part that she touches kind of breaks off and crumbles into pieces. It's dead. The tree is completely lifeless. Although it has not withered all the way to its roots yet. Yavanna turns to Fëanor and she says, "Foresighted were you for creating the Silmarils, because now the light of the two trees lives only in your Silmarils. Will you give them to me, so that I may rekindle the light of the two trees before their roots wither, and thus confound the evil of Melkor?" Fëanor, he's thinking about this. He's mulling this over. He's not sure of what to do. He's debating with himself, and within his head he hears a fell voice. The voice of Melkor, planted as a seed in his heart and mind over the preceding years. He hears the voice of Melkor saying, "Are not Yavanna and the other Valar, they're all of the same kindred with Melkor. They're all the same. And if Melkor warned me that they were going to try and steal my Silmarils, shouldn't I believe him? Isn't a thief able to tell other thieves' work?" And then Fëanor says before Yavanna, Manwe, Tulkas, Aule, and Mandos, before all the company of the Valar and the Maiar and the Vanyar and the Noldor, he says, "This thing I will not do. I will not give up my Silmarils." The language that Tolkien puts on Fëanor's lips is almost exactly the same language that Tolkien places on the lips of Frodo in the Cracks of Doom when he refuses to destroy the ring. This thing I will not do. Both of them say almost exactly the same things. Frodo about the ring, and Fëanor about the Silmarils. And Mandos says, "Thou hast said it," or "so be it." At that moment, messengers come from Formenos. And they say, Melkor came. Finwë opened the gates of Formenos at his knock. Melkor slew Finwë, killed him before his doors. And he defrauded and despoiled the stronghold of Formenos, took the Silmarils, took all of the jewels, and he's fled. He's gone. He killed Finwë, he took the Silmarils, he took other treasures that Fëanor and his father had, and he's gone. And it is at that moment that Fëanor lifts up his fist before the Valar, and he curses Melkor, and he gives him the new name of Morgoth, the black enemy of the world, the black foe of the world. He curses him, and he flees in anguish of grief and in despair. He flees. He's gone. And the Valar sympathize with him at this moment. But this is not only his pain. Tolkien tells us that if Fëanor had said yes to giving up his Silmarils before the messengers came from Formenos telling of his father's slaying, perhaps some of the deeds that Fëanor will commit in just a little while would not have occurred if he had said yes before the messengers came. But that was not to pass. After a time, Fëanor reappears within the square at the foot of the Mindon in Tirion. Remember, he was exiled from Tirion. So he is breaking the ban of the Valar by showing his face in Tirion. He shows up and all the crowd of the Noldor surround him. They crowd the square and they crown the crystal terraces and stairs with which Tirion is built. And he gives this grand speech with evil words that Tolkien says, words that stirred the Noldor to madness. Remember that the Noldor have become the victims of Melkor's lies and his deceits, and pride has arisen among them. Tolkien tells us that they were very proud, not just Fëanor, but all of the Noldor. And the words that Fëanor now speaks are these. He says, Melkor is now Morgoth, he's our black enemy, but he is of the same kindred with the other Valar. Leave with me. We will go back to where we came from, to Middle-earth. We will rule a kingdom of our own there in complete bliss and independence. We came from Middle-earth, we traveled to Aman, and from the joy we initially had here, we have come to woe. We've come to tragedy and sadness. Now let's try it the other way. Let's come from the woe and the sadness of my father's slaying, and let us come, if not to complete bliss, let us at least gain our freedom by going back to Middle-earth. Follow me, he says. And then Fëanor swears his oath. He swears this oath that will follow after him, his sons, and the entire house of the Noldor to the end of their days and long after their deaths. This oath, so evil, so potent, will follow their descendants until the end of days. And the oath is this, that Fëanor, his 7 sons, and anyone who chooses to join them, they will pursue and they will kill Vala, demon, elf, man, or any other creature who tries to keep a Silmaril out of their hands. And that Fëanor and his 7 sons, they will pursue Morgoth to the ends of the earth. They will never stop. They will go farther than Orome. They will endure longer than Tulkas. They will never stop until they have killed Melkor or at least died in the attempt. Fëanor is able to take this oath before his whole house, and his 7 sons take the oath with him. And in a beautiful drawing by Jenny Dolphin, we see Fëanor speaking this oath with his 7 sons, and they have their swords drawn, and their swords reflect the red light of the torches that all of the Noldor are holding. Remember, because the light of the 2 trees has been extinguished, so now they have to use torches, and the light from the torches bounces off of the drawn swords of Fëanor and his 7 sons, and it's like blood red. And how terrible an omen is that? And just as Fëanor and most of the Noldor are setting out to begin their journey back to Middle-earth, a herald of Manwë appears, a messenger from Manwë. The messenger rebukes Fëanor and says that he, nor his sons, nor his family may ever return to Middle-earth if they follow through with this oath. And I guess the message is also directed at those members of the Noldor who are unsure whether to follow Fëanor or not. And he says, if you follow him into exile. You may never return here. Fëanor's response to the messenger is so incredibly smart and direct that the messenger himself is silenced. And the messenger bows before Fëanor as Fëanor and his kindred depart. What did Fëanor respond to the messenger? He said, so he doesn't really respond to the messenger. He responds to his people. He says, so I've been exiled with my family, with my 7 sons. Are you going to leave your king, because now I'm your king, in exile? Are you not going to follow him? And it is those words that finally persuade the Noldor to follow him into exile. They travel to the north of the Calasyria. And at this point, the Valar are holding back. They're not doing anything to prevent this because they're trying to prove that the lies of Melkor are untrue. They are not holding the elves captive. If the elves came to the Blessed Realm on their own, they may leave on their own. Even if the Valar don't approve of that decision, they have the right to leave on their own because they came there on their own. They're not holding the elves captive. That's why the Valar don't do anything to stop this. And as they're traveling north, we're told that Fingolfin very reluctantly travels following Fëanor. Finarfin also travels reluctantly. Fingolfin goes for a number of reasons. Number one, because his son Fingon is persuaded by the words of Fëanor and wants to go and to depart the Blessed Realm. So he goes, number one, because of his son. He goes because he doesn't want to leave his people to, Tolkien tells us, the rash counsels of Fëanor. He doesn't want to leave them victim to the impulsivity of Fëanor. And also because of the words that he spoke to Fëanor, those powerful words that neither of them knew the full meaning of at the time, when he says, half-brother in blood, full brother in heart will I be. You will lead and I will follow. Now Fingolfin is bidden. He's bidden to follow his brother, even into exile. So Fingolfin follows. Finarfin follows. Finarfin is the most reluctant of all of the kindred of the Noldor to follow after Fëanor. And Finarfin is at the very rear of the host. Fingolfin's in the middle. Fëanor and his 7 sons are in the van. They're at the front of the host. They're traveling to the north. And finally, Fëanor's kind of debating with himself and his 7 sons. He says, we're never going to make it all the way back to Middle-earth with this such a large number of people. We're going to need ships. It'll take us way too long to build enough ships to shepherd all of us across the sea back to Middle-earth. So you know what? Let's go to the Teleri, ask them if they'll join us, and then we can all use their ships to make the journey. So they come to Alqualonde, and Fëanor speaks to the Teleri basically the same words that he spoke in the square at the foot of the Mindon in Tirion. Almost the same exact words, but the Teleri are unpersuaded. And they refuse either to help Fëanor in this desperate quest, and they also refuse to give them their ships. And Fëanor very angrily speaks to Olwe, the king of the Teleri. Remember, Olwe is good friends with Finwë, who is now passed to the halls of Mandos. So Olwe is speaking to his good friend's son. Fëanor says, how could you do this to us? When you landed on the shores of Middle-earth, you had nothing. We gave you our gems. We gave you everything. Where would you be without us? And then Olwe says, we are not betraying our friendship. It may be the part of a friend to rebuke his friend's folly. And then Olwe kind of summarizes for Fëanor the reasons why the Teleri are going to refuse to join with the Noldor. And then Olwe finally says, these ships, they're the work of our hearts, and we will never make them again. So no, we're not going to give them to you. Those are the same words that Fëanor spoke about the Silmarils, the work of my hands, the work of my heart, that I may never make the likes of again. For that reason, Fëanor refused to give up the Silmarils. Now that's being thrown back in his face, because Olwe refuses to give up his people's hard-won, hard-created ships. Ships with white timbers and golden beaks shaped in the likeness of swans with jet-black eyes. These master ships that have no rivals in all of Arda. So Fëanor kind of departs from Olwe's presence. He retreats back a little bit, and as his people are gathering about him, he's made his decision. And when his people have gathered about him, they go to the quays on which Alqualonde is built, and they begin to man by force the ships of the Teleri. When the Teleri see this happen, they begin to push some of the Noldor into the sea. Now remember that the Teleri are on the defensive. Even though they seem to strike the first blow, they're on the defensive, number one, because they are severely outnumbered, and number two, because Fëanor and his 7 sons are doing this by force. They seize the ships, they man the ships. Some of Fëanor's people are pushed into the sea by the Teleri, trying to prevent them from doing this. And then swords are drawn. In fact, it's interesting because Fëanor and his people are pushed back 3 times by the Teleri, perhaps because the Teleri are very adamant about protecting their ships and protecting their people. But eventually, what winds up happening is that the whole of Fëanor's host is mustered. Fingon comes in the vanguard, and all that Fingon sees is some of his people and some of his father's people being killed. He doesn't know that Fëanor is the one who started this. But when he sees some of his own people falling, he and all of his host, the whole host of Fingolfin, they join the fight, and what winds up happening is that nearly all of the Teleri are slain on the lamplit keys of Alqualonde. This becomes the first kinslaying. The Noldor man the ships. They take the Teleri ships by force. Some of the Noldor travel on the ships, some travel by land because there's simply not enough ships for all of them. And so those traveling by ship are parallel with those walking along the coast, traveling along the coast, and they go north, 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 north from Alqualonde. Fëanor and his 7 sons are on some of these ships. And finally, when they come to the far north, they realize that they have 2 choices. They either are going to have to sail directly across Belaguer to Middle-earth, or they're going to have to travel across the grinding ice, the Hel Caraxe, which is this frozen, frost-covered strait, very thin, connecting the northeastern shore of Aman with the northwestern shore of Beleriand, of Middle-earth. It's so thin that there's not even enough room for all of them to cross at once. So Fëanor commits treason and tricks his brother Fingolfin. I should mention at this point that Finarfin turned back. Finarfin turned back after the kinslaying. He went back to Valmar. He received the pardon of the Valar, and he became the king of the remainder of the Noldor, who are his people who returned with him. So Finarfin stayed back. So at this point, it's only Fingolfin, Fingolfin's children, Finarfin's children, who continued the journey, and Fëanor and his house. Fëanor betrays Fingolfin by taking the ships with his 7 sons, sailing across the sea to Middle-earth, without telling Fingolfin. They had the mastery of the ships from the beginning. So Fëanor and his 7 sons, they land in Middle-earth, and as soon as they land at the Firth of Drengist, with the outlet of Losgar, nigh akin to the Firth of Drengist, Maethros turns to his father, and he says, "Who will we send back to bring over our king, Fingolfin and his people? And who will be the first to be brought back? Will it be Fingon the Valiant?" Fingon being the eldest son of Fingolfin. We're told that Maethros and Fingon used to be great friends before strife arose between Fëanor and Fingolfin's house. So he says, so who's going to come back first? Is it going to be Fingon the Valiant? And Fëanor, with malice in his heart, turns to his eldest son Maethros and he says, "None and none. We're not sending anyone back, and nobody's coming back here. Those we have lost along the way, I count as little loss. They were needless baggage on the road." And Fëanor gives the command, "Burn the ships." And Maethros alone, among Fëanor's 7 sons, stands aside and does not participate, as the ships of the Teleri are burned, preventing Fingolfin and his host from completing the journey, leaving Fingolfin and his host stranded and abandoned in Araman, which is that northern wasteland before the grinding ice. And from across the sea, Fingolfin and his people can see the light of the burning. And that light sets a fire in Fingolfin's heart, even more than before, to complete the journey and to come face to face with his treacherous half-brother once more. So what does Fingolfin do? They complete the journey by land, across the Hel Caraxe. What Fëanor deems not possible, to cross over the Hel Caraxe, over the grinding ice, Fingolfin and his host, they do. They complete it. Along the way, they incur many losses. I would even venture to say that probably half of the host of Fingolfin is lost and perishes in this desperate, desperate struggle across the grinding ice connecting the Blessed Realm and Middle-earth. In fact, the wife of Turgon, Fingolfin's 2nd son, is killed during this march across the Hel Caraxe. But Fingolfin and his people arrive, and they step foot in Middle-earth once more at the first rising of the moon, which we will cover next week. we're going to draw this episode to a close right now. Next week, we will reflect a little bit more on the events that we've discussed in this episode in part 2 and part 1. I just really wanted to get through the plot today. So thank you all so much for watching. God bless. May the grace of Iluvatar ever go with you. God bless you. Have a great week, everyone. See you next week.